Good evening, everyone. Good evening. On behalf of Beyond Baroque Literary Arts Center, I'd like to welcome you all to the Wanda Coleman Theater and to California Dreaming, Writing the Golden State, the new literary terrain. We are celebrating this book that we have in the bookstore today, and we're really excited to be gathered with you all. My name is Jimmy Vega. I'm the Associate Director of Beyond Baroque. I'd like to start by acknowledging Beyond Baroque's presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Tonga peoples. We acknowledge the wrong done to these peoples through settler colonialism, genocidal practices, and the violent disposition of their land. As an arts organization, we are committed to uplifting Indigenous communities, their stories, and cultures. For those who don't know, Beyond Baroque is Los Angeles' oldest literary arts center located here in Venice, California. Founded in 1968 by George Drury Smith, first as an experimental literary magazine before reimagining itself and becoming the literary home we know it as today. We are based out of the original Venice City Hall and help support writers and help cultivate new writing through our extensive program of writing workshops, readings, and performances. We offer a number of workshops online via Zoom, such as our free weekly Monday night fiction workshop, facilitated by Raquel Baker, and our historic Wednesday night poetry workshop, currently facilitated by Arthur Kazakian. Similarly, we offer several paid in-person and online workshops throughout the year. Later this fall, we'll feature a special critique workshop with Dorianne Locks and Kim Adonisio, with a few more workshops slated for the rest of the year as well. And aside from our workshops, we offer several readings throughout the year. Next week, we'll return with our series On the Stairs with Skulls and Stairs, as well as a special reading featuring Wei Japan, Dare Williams, and Sarah Ellen Fowler. Additionally, we recently opened our new exhibition upstairs in the Mike Kelly Gallery titled Anonymous Stellar Ravines Volume 1. The exhibition is a collaborative effort with artist Byron Baker and our poet in residence and artist Will Alexander. So do please come back, get involved for all of that and more. Please do visit our website at beyondbaroque.org and catch us on our socials at BBLitArts. We also offer memberships to Beyond Baroque, starting at $60 for an individual membership. Purchasing a membership allows us to have free programming like the one we have tonight. It also gives you a discount for used books in the bookstore and gives you a discount for our intensive workshops as well. And then lastly, I do want to invite you all to our annual fundraiser gala hosted on November 2nd. The Beyond Gala is going to be over at Playa Studios in Culver City. We'll be gathering to celebrate our special honorees, Sheshu Foster, Ashaki Jackson, Douglas Messerly, and Exene and John Doe of the punk band X, who actually met at the Wednesday night workshop here some years ago. So I think it's going to be a good, fun night. John and Exene are going to play a special performance to conclude the night. So that's going to be kind of fun. And do, inquire about all of that online as well. Before we begin and I bring our hosts for the evening, I quickly want to say a big thank you to all of our staff for making tonight possible. Quentin Ring, Yvonne Salinas, Eric Alberg in the booth, Genesis Perez, Nick Foreman, Tyler Newfield in the bookstore. Thank you for all that you do. All right, I think that's it from me. I'm gonna welcome Carribean Fragoza up to the stage, who is a fiction writer, journalist from South El Monte. Her collection of stories, Eat the Mouth That Feeds You, was published in 2021 by City Lights and was a finalist for the 2022 PEN Award. Her co-edited compilation of essays, East of East, The Making of Greater El Monte, was published by Rutgers University Press, and her new co-edited collection of essays, Writing Home, New Terrains of California, was published by Angel City Press this year. She has published in Harper's Bazaar, the New York Times, Ziziva, Alta, Bomb, Wisache, KCET, the Los Angeles Review of Books, Art News, Topics of Meta, and Aperture Magazine. She's a pro editor at Wisache Magazine and faculty at CalArts. She lives in the San Gabriel Valley in Greater Los Angeles. Please welcome Carribean Fragoza.
Thank you, Jimmy, for that great introduction. And I also want to thank from the bottom of my heart everyone here at Beyond Baroque that has made this space available to us and that is supporting us in it's not the launch. We're now in event 5 of Writing the Golden State. So I'm very happy that we've had people come out, that we've been able to share space with our writers that we'd only been working with online via email, sometimes phone calls, but it's really a different experience. And it's so special when we're able to share physical space together to hear the authors in their own words, read their work. And so I'm glad that we get to have that opportunity today to, again, share space, share words together. So big thank you to all of the authors that are joining us here today. We have a really great lineup. Also, shout outs always to Angel City Press that believed in our project and has made it into the reality that it is today. So a lot of love to Angel City Press, and to our artist always, Fernando Corona, who lives in Mexicali, but is always very present with us in our book. So all of the artwork, beautiful artwork that we see in the book is by Fernando Corona, who's a fantastic artist and educator and designer. So if you know, or you may not know, I'll just say a few words about the origins of this project, Writing the Golden State, the New Literary Terrain of California. It started off as a whole other thing. It was a section that we, Romeo and I, we are co-directors of the South del Monte Arts Posse, but also co-editors, along with Samin Judat, of this book. We were editing Boom California, a journal of UC Press. And so we started a new section where we invited authors to write about their hometown, their communities in California. And we really wanted to start just kind of feeling out the ground, just started mapping out a literary territory of California. We know the stories that have been told and told once again of what Los Angeles, for example, and Hollywood are supposed to be. And there are definite ideas of what California represents in the public imaginary. But we wanted to represent it through a grassroots perspective of people that have spent time in the land, on the ground, experiencing and building communities in a lot of different ways. And so we've managed to grow that project that just was a section in Boom, California, into a whole book project. And so I'm really proud of the work that we've put together, and I'm proud of the beautiful pieces that we've crafted with every single one of you. And it's a lot of work to write and to edit, and here we are with this beautiful book in our hands. So I'm going to read just a little snippet from the introduction. This introduction was co-written by the three editors. And if you've had time to comb through it, maybe you can identify the different voices of the different editors. But I'll read the part that I wrote because it helps me feel grounded wherever I go, to remember where I come from. I was born in Los Angeles, but I grew up in South del Monte, California, in the San Gabriel Valley. So when I feel rooted in where I come from and what is close to my heart and relevant in my soul, I feel connected to all of you. So I'll just start off with this part of the introduction, and then I'll turn it over to our authors for the evening. Leg Lake in the Whittier Narrows is a place of return. Generations of families flock here to celebrate birthdays, exercise, barbecue, and fish along its banks. It's a place to salute a sunset at the side of a friendly octopus as its last rays recede behind the western rim of the valley. Concrete monsters are worn smooth by the bodies of countless children climbing and sliding down their colorful limbs and tails. They always face the water, and we all learn to face it too. A place to be held, embraced by hills and the San Gabriel Mountains, cupped in the intimacy of the Narrows. The river is a portal between worlds. Like a fire is for gathering, so is the body of water, both for solitude or for intimate company. It retains the ancient memory of the land, of this place that has been home to ancestors for more years than we know how to count, where urbanization has cemented over or channeled into regulated water systems or erased so many streams and brooks from the land altogether. Some bodies of water have persisted by their own volition, as well as the efforts of people who have worked to conserve them. Certainly, Leg Lake and Whittier Narrows are constructed spaces curated as parks that offer the public access to essential green space and recreation. Picnic areas, sports facilities, bike paths, and exercise equipment serve as essential health and wellness resources for all communities, especially for working class families in the San Gabriel Valley. But beyond and before infrastructure, more than water pumps that keep the lake from becoming stagnant or sprinklers that keep park lawns green, is something deeper that nourishes the land and continues to call us. Water as subterranean, water as embedded memory, water as language of its own, water as a call of return. It calls birds, a regular stop on their migratory paths. It calls babies. Watch them run to it immediately, ready to splash onto its algae-laden shore. Watch how they are eventually lulled to sleep by it. For many of us, the lake holds our spirit for safekeeping. When we are lost, we know where to find ourselves. We return and cast a blurred gaze over its sparkling waters, to rest, to allow our hearts to speak without the work of words. So now I'd like to introduce our very first reader. Thank you, thank you. A good friend of ours, Kenji Liu. From New Jersey, the Lenape homeland, to Los Angeles in the Tongva Nation, where he now lives, Kenji Liu tries to see places through their multiple layers. Little Tokyo is full of them due to colonization, forced eviction, development and redevelopment, and always resistance and joy. The ecological layer is one he has begun to examine more lately. He spends a lot of time walking and looking at plants and animals everywhere, thinking about how we interact with them in our neighborhoods. It helps him feel connected and inspires creativity. Find him at kenjiliu.com. So let's welcome Kenji. Thank you.
Thank you, Caribbean. Thank you to Beyond Baroque. It's nice to be back. And thank you to the editors of this great book, Caribbean, Romeo and Samin. I'll get right to it. So I work in Little Tokyo, and that's kind of the main community that I consider to be home, aside from the neighborhood I live in, El Sereno. And I now have a 2-year-old toddler born in LA. So now this is definitely, kind of where I am, where I'm from. So the piece I have in the book, it's written in a zuihitsu form, which is a Japanese form that's kind of like a braided essay in a sense, but it's a little bit more, the traditional way of writing it is to write kind of almost random observations and you kind of make the mental connections. To eat a fig is to swallow ghosts. So I'll pause between each little piece and let your brain work a little bit. A fig fruit is composed of hundreds, sometimes thousands of tiny flowers, florets, hidden inside a fleshy covering. This inside-out world is why we never see fig flowers. Some might think of oranges when quizzed about Southern California fruit, but oranges originated in China. In science fiction, a Dyson sphere is a massive shell built to completely enclose a star in order to capture its total energy output. By containing the star, the sphere completely blocks all outgoing visible light, altering the way it appears to outside observers. This hidden inside-out world is why we might never be able to see advanced extraterrestrial civilizations. Without the knowledge and experience of immigrant Chinese agricultural workers, California's orange industry would have died quickly. Los Angeles has been the site of many science fiction stories, most notably Blade Runner. It is notable for how thoroughly it enacts an Orientalist fantasy of a 2019 where Asianness has saturated society, but without any actual Asian people. We are an implied threat, but without us, there is no future. There's an orchid that looks like a certain female bee in order to attract certain male bees, but the bee is extinct. The orchid continues to testify to a bee that no longer exists. The bee is implied. Some fig trees require a special female wasp to pollinate their flowers and grow fruit. In return, the fig offers the wasp a place to lay its eggs and reproduce. Spanish missionaries introduced figs to California, but the fig wasp hadn't been brought to the colonization, and the fig kept waiting for her. The mission fig was bred to produce fruit without the wasp. The wasp is missing in our Blade Runner future. The fig is the third tree to be mentioned in the Bible. Adam and Eve used its leaves to cover their nakedness after Eve supposedly messed things up for them. It's just like a colonizer to think he should cut female wig wasps out of the picture. The self-pollinating fig is the ghost of conquest. It's a memory of colonization. Does it remember the wasp? It might not. Colonization is like that. But when we eat a mission fig, we eat the fruit of conquest. In the fig community, there are different family arrangements. Some types of fig trees are monoecious, which means they grow both male and female flowers. Others are dioecious, in which some trees offer male and female flowers, and other trees only have female flowers. All need special female wasps to facilitate pollination. Nature is naturally queer. There's a giant Morton Bay fig tree in the heart of Little Tokyo, planted around 1920 by Reverend Shutai Aoyama of the Koyasan Buddhist congregation in front of its temple many years ago. The temple has moved, but the tree remains, watching over the block. In some Buddhist traditions, contemplating the impermanence of the body is a way to develop equanimity and compassion for self and others. A person is basically a fig, thousands of flowers inside a fleshy covering, growing, opening, closing, passing away. Close the eyes, turn inward. Notice the weight of our bodies on the earth. Watch the breath enter and leave the body. Watch feelings, thoughts, and sensations flower and pass. It is hard to see what's happening inside a person, just as it is with a fig or a Dyson sphere. The Japanese word for fig tree, ichijiku, is composed of the kanji for no, a particle of negation, flower, and fruit. This refers to a tree that bears fruit without flowering. The ancient pictogram for no was a person holding something in both hands, but since then, it has come to denote not having. No can also be read as mu, which means nothingness, or a response to a Zen koan that has neither a yes or no answer. Rather than divide into a binary, mu refutes the question. The problem with the Dyson sphere is it has a huge surface area, which makes it vulnerable to comets and meteorites. A meteor impact could throw the whole thing off center, or burst through to the interior. An alternate vision is a tight network of stations weaving around the sun. The ancient root of the word wasp is possibly related to weave. Weave can refer to interlacing a material together, but also to devising. A strangler fig grows and envelops a host tree. Once the host tree dies and decomposes, it leaves a long hollow inside the fig tree. Early Spanish missionary colonization established itself near Native American towns and villages, tried to envelop and strangle them. The Aoyama fig tree is located in a parking lot. It grows straight up from asphalt and concrete. It is one of the only direct connections to the actual dirt below. It is also a strangler fig. What lives in its center? An entrance and exit for ghosts. The fig's response, moo. If the star inside a Dyson sphere was to die and vanish, what would be left? The Buddha was enlightened after sitting in meditation under a fig tree for many days in Bodh Gaya, India. Though the original tree was destroyed and replaced, a branch from the original was rooted elsewhere in Sri Lanka. The problem with people is that we are vulnerable to everything. Almost anything can throw us off center. The Buddhist insight of anatta, or no self, reminds us that although we may have an experience of the self as continuous, when you get down to it, we are constantly changing without a solid center, empty of a true self. The adjective empty evolved from the Old English word for leisure. The modern Greek word for empty evolved from a word meaning freedom from fear. In Shinto, giant trees are often sites for local gods. Properly imbued with sacred ropes and paper streamers, they become indistinguishable from gods. There is an infamous black and white photo of the corner of First and Central, a block south of the Aoyama fig tree. It shows military police forcing Japanese Americans onto buses headed to horse stalls at Santa Anita racetrack, then concentration camps. Only a few more blocks away, next to the historic founding site of Los Angeles, is where an 1871 race riot took place, in which dozens of Chinese people were shot and hanged by a mob of hundreds. Los Angeles without Asians seems speculative, but they already tried to make it happen. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kenji. And I just have to say how much I love writing about about trees. I love that we have 2 essays in this book about figs. So maybe there's a thing about figs that we love. Our next reader today is David Helps, born on the territory of the Haudenosaunee. Haudenosaunee. Yes, I'm glad that several of you know how to say it. David Helps grew up in a small town in Ontario, Canada, that lies, much like California, between breadbasket and Rust Belt. David came to writing about LA by way of living in Toronto, a city almost as convinced of its own exceptionalism, but with worse weather. He currently organizes with the Graduate Employees Organization Local 3550 of the American Federation of Teachers and gets homesick more often than he admits. More of his work can be found at david-helps.com. Please welcome David Helps.
It's really nice to be in this. I'll lift this up a little bit. In this really beautiful, warm, softly lit space. It feels very like almost being lulled to sleep as Kenji was reading in a really soothing lullaby kind of way. So my piece will probably not have, hopefully, maybe probably not have that effect. No one knew how long the house at 11560 Link Street had been abandoned, but the neighbors wanted it gone. On a February morning in 1990, Tom Bradley, Los Angeles' first black mayor, stood in front of the graffitied and crumbling bungalow in the Harbor Gateway neighborhood. Here in Southeast LA, where neighbors endured both the crack cocaine trade and the militarized police response, dilapidated rock houses became a lightning rod. Addressing the assembled group of journalists, Bradley congratulated his administration for its war on these so-called neighborhood nightmares. On the mayor's signal, a bulldozer roared into motion and reduced the structure to a heap of wood, concrete rubble, and broken glass. Today, there is no 11560 Link Street. It's been overwritten. A smaller house with a new number stands in its place. By the late 1980s, years of austerity and job loss had taken their toll on South Los Angeles neighborhoods. Perhaps no part of the built environment symbolized urban decline better than blighted homes, reminders of the middle class that left and the resources they took with them. The Link Street property, however, was not simply vacant. When the city's Bureau of Community Safety dispatched someone to photograph the site in 1989, they found only a burned-out shell. What is striking about the pictures is not only the extent of the damage, but that a routine code inspection would generate such aestheticized images. In saturated black and white, the Southern California sun is unforgiving. Mike Davis famously wrote in his 1990 book, City of Quartz, that Los Angeles is only ever depicted one of two ways, as sunshine or as noir. The Link Street photographs are striking because they reveal the one within the other, urban danger drenched in sunlight. Despite their artistic allure, the photographs served a purely documentary purpose. They came to me as crime scene evidence, so to speak. Once developed, the Link Street photographs found their way to the desk of Tom Bradley, and eventually into his mayoral papers after he left office 3 years later. Today, they're tucked inside a folder labeled Operation Knockdown 1990. A few weeks before the Link Street demolition, Mayor Bradley had announced that the built environment would be the new front in the city's war on drugs. Dubbed Operation Knockdown, the program enlisted the Los Angeles Police Department to identify drug trafficking sites for demolition. In the span of 1 year, LA bulldozed at least 215 alleged crack houses. In February 1990, the bungalow on Link Street joined them in the rubble. The bulldozer shaped the life of 20th century cities more than almost any other innovation. Between 1949 and 1974, the federal government poured more than $6 billion into urban renewal in cities and inner-ring suburbs. Urban renewal promised to stimulate private investment, improve the nation's housing stock, and demonstrate American Cold War superiority by lifting hundreds of thousands of families out of poverty. The 1949 Housing Act committed the government to building 810,000 new housing units by 1955. But white opposition to racial integration and to public housing made raising slums easier than building livable homes to replace them. Renters made up the majority of the displaced, with Black and Latinx residents significantly overrepresented. LA's largest urban renewal project, the demolition of Bunker Hill, displaced almost 3,000 households, according to the researchers behind the Mapping Inequality Public History Project. The 1980s gave blight removal a perverse law and order twist. This was the height of the crack abuse epidemic, and everywhere the metaphors of total war were swirling. Police and prosecutors constantly described their task as a Vietnam-like war of attrition. Speaking to a reporter for Newsweek in 1985, a Black woman from the South Central Organizing Committee compared her own bloc to Lebanon, whose civil war had just introduced suicide bombing into the global vernacular. If the fight against drugs and gangs was indeed a war, Operation Knockdown made sure that it would be fought over scorched earth. The bungalow at 11560 Link Street held a unique distinction among Operation Knockdown targets. It was the first structure destroyed after the Los Angeles City Council hurriedly passed a 60-day moratorium on demolitions in late January 1990. The moratorium came just days after the Los Angeles Times revealed that some of the demolished buildings were either occupied, had no connection to the drug trade, or might have been repaired. 33-year-old Henry Smith told the reporter how he watched the destruction of his childhood home, which belonged to a family member living out of state, just 2 days after Christmas. "I've lived here since elementary school," he protested. "I'll have to move to Skid Row after they tear it down." With this expose, the Los Angeles Times told a story about good intentions. In its urgent war on drugs, the logic went, the city failed to consider the collateral damage. This was beside the point, since Mayor Bradley publicly admitted that the Bureau of Community Safety never defined what counted as an unrepairable structure, let alone demonstrated that any of the targets were sites of illegal activity. Only after the expose did the city establish a protocol to inform owners about city loans that they could apply to bring their building up to code. Operation Knockdown continued, even with the moratorium in effect, as the City Council approved the demolition of structures like 11560 Link Street. Whatever the city's intentions, the consequences were clear. Operation Knockdown reduced the already scarce supply of affordable housing at the very moment that homelessness became a mass phenomenon, and one experienced overwhelmingly by Black and brown Angelenos suffering the brunt of deindustrialization and cuts to public health programs like drug counseling. Given the new scrutiny on Operation Knockdown, the Bureau of Community Safety did its research on 11560 Link Street. According to the agency's files, police first reported the building in August 1988, and an inspection later that month found it to be vacant. And though it lacked the Hollywood features of a drug hideout, steel door, guard dogs, Uzi-toting gangsters, the inspection photographs made clear the impossibility of a simple rehab. It was a different kind of crime scene. Many of Operation Knockdown's targets, including the Link Street bungalow, began their rapid deterioration as foreclosures. Beginning in 1980, Washington passed legislation that incentivized risky real estate lending, expanded the secondary mortgage market, removed strict conflict of interest rules, and significantly lowered the amount of capital that banks needed to have on hand to be considered solvent. In California especially, predatory lending, a burst housing bubble, and outright fraud unleashed a deluge of foreclosures. Among the worst offenders in the 1980s was Citicorp Mortgage, which grew its market share by paying kickbacks to realtors who aggressively steered their clients towards Citicorp loans. Among Citicorp's foreclosures in this period, 11560 Link Street. The magical thinking that allows mortgages to be packaged and traded, manipulated in value, and collectively insured by federal regulators for more money than the agencies even have on hand eventually touches down somewhere. Time and again, that wreckage has occurred in under-resourced and hyper-exploited communities like Southeast LA. Predatory mortgage lenders inflated the housing bubble until it popped, transforming Black and brown people's homes into foreclosures. The transformation of a house into rubble, the pulverization of concrete and glass and metal, in turn releases potentially lead and asbestos-laden dust into the environment. In this life cycle of creative destruction, Angelenos of color suffered at every stage. In 1994, when the Northridge earthquake destroyed parts of the Santa Monica Freeway, a concrete recycling company dragged the rubble to Huntington Park, an industrial town in the LA Harbor region whose population is 97% Latinx. The mound of rubble measured 150 feet. Residents called it La Montaña. Residents believed the site would be used for polluted soil and debris from the construction of the Alameda Corridor, a rail line linking the LA and Long Beach ports so the region can better compete with other hubs of global trade. Community members began to report nosebleeds and breathing problems like asthma and bronchitis. After years of activism, Huntington Park shut down the recycling facility in 2002. The effort to remove La Montaña began 3 years later. To perceive something as weird is to recognize that it is out of place, like a mountain of concrete rubble in the middle of a residential neighborhood. The weird is marked by an exorbitant presence, a teaming which exceeds our capacity to represent it, the late Mark Fisher wrote in The Weird and the Eerie. The eerie, by contrast, is the inescapable sensation that something is missing. The discomfort that comes with looking at the Link Street photographs is in the reminder that this rubble had at one point been someone's home. We often struggle to imagine these things as violence or as crimes. It's true that in the wake of the savings and loan crash, a number of fraudsters were prosecuted, a few were even convicted. But convictions, like home demolitions, bypass solutions for the real victims. No one regained shelter or intergenerational wealth or a family's memories just because a crooked banker went to prison. The image of 11560 Link Street are crime scene photos only when you know what's outside the frame. Confronting the housing crisis requires new ways of seeing. It means heeding the words of the abolitionist scholar and documentary filmmaker Brett Story in her book, Prison Land. Let us look everywhere so that we can act anywhere. Thanks.
Thank you so much, David. Following, we have Cassandra Lane. Cassandra Lane was born and raised in Louisiana in the 1970s. Despite the fact that her great-grandfather was lynched, the earlier generations of her family did not join the Great Migration, that beautiful, dream-filled flock of Black Louisianians who escaped Jim Crow terror for what they hoped would be a safer home in the city of Los Angeles. Lane followed those pioneers' footsteps decades later, settling first in Glendale in 2001. In 20 years, she has lived in 7 different apartments and houses across Los Angeles County. Her current South LA neighborhood has remnants of Louisiana all over it, from a New Orleans snowball shop to a jazz and blues club restaurant called La Louisiane, to the crawfish boudin she buys at the corner store. And so feels like home more than any other place she has lived in the City of Angels. Learn more at cassandralane.net. Welcome, Cassandra.
Thank you so much, Caribbean and Romeo and Samine, editors extraordinaire. And thank you so much to Beyond Baroque. This is the first place that I read 23 years ago when I moved to Los Angeles from Louisiana and was so frightened. The bottom, I wore a dress and the bottom was shaking. I'm always happy to be back to Beyond Baroque. I love this place. Thank you to everyone who came out. And I'm gonna don these and probably lift the book so that I can see because I'm at that age. Behold Buddha. In late 2007, with our heads filled with scenes from our favorite HGTV shows, my husband and I became first-time house hunters in Los Angeles. We were short on cash and helium high on hope. Weighed down by student debt, we strapped our baby to my chest or his and explored quaint bungalows in Pasadena and Altadena, Spanish-style stuccos in Leimert Park. 4 or 5 or 6 months later, our hope was a deflated balloon trapped in the wires of a telephone pole. Everything we viewed, every inhabitable thing, was out of reach. We retreated to our apartment in West Adams, attempted to erase the images of houses that had felt like ours. 2 years later, at the height of the global financial crisis, our misfortune reversed. I landed a new job as a college prep counselor for Black and brown students at a nonprofit headquartered in Cerritos, a suburb of Los Angeles, a job paying 10 grand more than my teaching job at a small high school in the Crenshaw district. Marcus and I left our apartment in the West Adams neighborhood of LA and rented a house near my job. We spent 2 years reducing our debt-to-income ratio and, in 2012, made an offer on a short sale in North Long Beach that had a $250,000 sticker price. Imagine. Ooh, be careful, my boss warned. North Long Beach is rough around the edges. I bristled. I have always lived on the wrong side of the tracks, or bayou, or interstate, or street. And she was not paying me enough to buy a house in a neighborhood that would warrant her approval. We are both Louisiana natives, but she, 2 decades my senior, grew up as part of the Black bourgeoisie. I grew up poor, rough around the edges. The house we bought bore no resemblance to the charming abodes of my and Marcus's fantasies. It was squat and generic, the color of spearmint gum, chewed, spit out, and smashed into the ground. Inside, a couple of holes big enough for possums to climb in and out of glared from the walls. The backyard was a hay-colored wasteland where a 1-story high-brick fire pit, ash-caked and forlorn, jutted out from its center. Marcus, a newly licensed real estate agent, was representing us. He waxed on and on about the house's potential, its bones. He, who once was homeless and struggling with addiction, is always the full glass to my empty one. Pessimism is a luxury he cannot afford. His giddy visions began to pull me in. We bid and closed on the house within 45 days, a miracle for a short sale. We spent months working with handymen, filling in holes and refurbishing wood floors, patching up plumbing and roofing problems. More months, and then a year, 2 years, helped us warm up the rooms and earth tones, clean out and get acclimated to the ancient pit, discover backyard Persian lemon and pomegranate bushels we'd overlooked, make friends out of neighbors, watch our kids bump up against each other's budding social skills. Until in 2013, I was offered a job back in the city, a position in downtown LA offering a 20 grand hike in pay. I took it. But I was not cut out for hour-long commuting. I told Marcus about all the new apartment buildings and restaurants I was seeing in the city center, the new DTLA, how vibrant and alive, gentrified, the new downtown had become. And there were even families with small children and dogs. A new elementary school for downtown children was opening in the fall. If we acted fast, I said, we could try to snag a seat for our son who would be going into the first grade. Marcus admitted he was sick of his daily commute to and from work in Hollywood, and he missed LA. Shocking our neighbors, we left as quickly as we'd swept in. We found a lovely family to lease out our house while we rented an apartment downtown. The rent was a grand more than our mortgage, but we consoled ourselves. It was a temporary move. We watched the housing economy and paid down some more debt. In the spring of 2015, we dove into house hunting again. This time, our budget was $400,000, pending the sale of our Long Beach house, which meant again disappointing our neighbors and our new tenants, who'd quickly made friends with them. We searched for months, dismayed that housing prices were once more largely out of reach. Does anything bounce back like capitalism? One summer afternoon, we were driving down Slauson Avenue, making a beeline for the creamy smoothies at Simply Wholesome, that icon that sits on the southwest corner of Overhill Drive and Slauson Avenue, in an area some residents refer to as Black Beverly Hills. We were 10 blocks from Simply Wholesome when I asked Marcus to turn down a south side street, cutting across Slauson, to look for open house signs. I knew the dreamy houses on the north side, the hilly Black Beverly Hills side, were astronomically out of reach. But the streets on the south side of Slauson and east of Kenniston Avenue are lined with modest houses filled mostly with working class residents. As Marcus drove, I spotted a small for sale sign in front of a 1920s salmon-colored stucco bungalow. I hated the color, but the house was quaint with an ace-shaped facade like the houses we drew as kids. The postcard lawn was lush green. California native plants lined the pebbled stoop. Marcus turned off the engine. "Oh no, not another house tour," our son, then 8, groaned from the back seat. "We'll just run through real quick if it's open, sweetie," I said. Marcus searched the address on his real estate listing database. "It's not on here," he said. We climbed out of the car and knocked on the door. The owner let us in to tour the house, the backyard, the detached garage, which had been converted into an apartment with a full kitchen and bathroom. The main house was tiny, barely 750 square feet, but I was mesmerized by the 500 square foot apartment. "My writing studio," I squealed. I pulled Marcus aside. "Babe, I want it." "I don't know, babe," he said, shaking his head. "This house is even smaller than what we're used to." I can't. I tried on his usual persuasive optimism. "But look at the yard. Over time, we could add on to the house. There's so much potential." Marcus asked the owner why the house wasn't showing on the real estate database. "Because this area is changing so much," she said. "The investors are getting older folks to sell their homes and then remodeling them real quick and flipping them for double." "You could make a lot of money," Marcus said. "I'm not trying to gentrify this neighborhood," she said. She was about my mother's age. If I can't sell to somebody Black, I'm not in a hurry to move." I'm sorry. Her plan was to retire in a condo in Long Beach, a place where she wouldn't have to care for a yard. I looked out the window at her yard and envisioned our son playing ball, slinging frisbees, hosting friends. This is it. This is the one, I told Marcus as we drove away. This is our house. The quasi-governmental organization I worked for was headquartered in a high-rise in downtown LA. My colleagues and I could look out the window and see the Ritz-Carlton glinting gold and silver under the sun. We could glance down at the streets where the towers cast their shadows and see homeless men and women walking, sleeping. At lunchtime, we cut through an alley on our way to try out one hot DTLA spot after another. Scents of baking bread and urine filled our nostrils. Middle class and ambitious, we were sandwiched between these extremes, closer to the ones in the shadows. Inside the suite, the communications and public relations workstations were laid out next to each other in cubicles that reminded me of my old newspaper newsrooms. As senior writer, I helped craft and spread the organization's mission. All children, regardless of their family's economic status or zip code, deserve access to high-quality early education. Most of my colleagues were in their early 30s to early 40s. I was on the older end. When I told them that I was buying another house, their eyes lit up with curiosity. Their OMG, congratulations, was followed immediately by, where? In their eyes, I watched numbers being crunched. My likely salary, my likely housing budget, the likeliest corners of the city I could afford. And I saw the deeper desire underneath their questions. Maybe I too can buy a house in this city that feels so out of reach. I answered them vaguely. It's about 10 minutes east of Culver City, adjacent to View Park, Ladera Heights, and Baldwin Hills. I dangled the jewels that hang over South Central like chandeliers. A few days later, Amir, a Black coworker whose father is a longtime building contractor in South Central, pulled the veil off my vagueness. He was like one of my younger brothers, always roasting, always seeking to bring me down a notch. As he walked toward our work section late that morning, he yelled from across the room, "Hey guys, Cassandra ain't in no Baldwin Hills. She in the Crenshaw district. Her new house is right around the corner from Buddha's Liquor." Thank you.
Yeah, so today, if you haven't read the essays in their entirety, I really recommend that you recognize how tantalizing these excerpts are and that you check out the book. It is for sale, I have to say, here at the bookstore, which is very well stocked with so many other great books. And yeah, I just feel so proud to hear and just impressed over and over again every time I hear the words that you all wrote for our book. So our last reader tonight is Ramón Garcia. Ramón Garcia was an undocumented child, although his parents had legally immigrated to Modesto, California from Michoacán, Mexico, when he was 6 years old. He grew up in Modesto when it was culturally removed from the Bay Area. As far as he knows, in high school, he was the only Mexican Chicano teenager in Modesto who was a fan of the Smiths. Later, when he came to LA during his college years at UC Santa Cruz, he found that the Smiths had a significant Chicanx following in LA. That's when he realized that art and identity are not geographically fixed, but perhaps are a translation, adaptation, and transformation of chosen cultures. You can read more about Ramón Garcia at ramongarciaphd.com. Let's welcome Ramón to the podium.
Thank you, Caribbean. I want to thank Beyond Baroque, Jimmy, Ivan, and the staff. So I want to thank Angel City Press and, of course, the editors, Romeo, Caribbean, and Samin, for their fine work with the book. I love the art by Fernando that they included in my piece, and everybody else's looks wonderful also. And I'm just really happy with it, and and so thank you. My essay, if I had to categorize it, is a fictionalized memoir. It's entitled Adolescent Blues. The girl interviewed on the local TV news was a student at Thomas Downey High School. It was the day after Mr. Hardwick, the 11th grade English teacher, was gunned down on the front porch of his house. It's hard to believe anybody would do such a thing. We're all in shock. He was such a part of our school. He was the nicest man. We'll miss him a lot. The girl recited the expected sentiments, the called for clichés, as students seemed compelled to do, stepping into their roles of caring, shocked students. That's what high school life seemed to demand, assuming the roles that had been unquestionably determined, as if by fate. In this, high school operated like my Mexican family, in which each family member's behavior, strictly demarcated by age and gender, had long ago been decided. The killers were shown on the local news channels being handcuffed by the Modesto police, scrawny white boys with defiantly unfashionable hair that was too long for the early 1980s. They were hardly older than Mr. Hardwick's students, in worn Levi's and T-shirts, their older brother's hand-me-downs. They had barely distinguishable blank faces, inscrutably stoic, the kind of troubled poor white kids the airport district abundantly spawned. They were set free after a short trial. I watched the reports on the TV news, but never made out why they were not convicted. The flag in the invariably green lawn of the school was set at half-mast, as it was every time a student committed suicide, died in a drunk-driving car crash, or accidentally drove a truck into a canal and drowned. It was the official gesture of remorse, hence false, because no one mourned, no one actually felt sorrow. It was only the excitement of the sordid news, the lurid details of accidents or death that were of any interest. Everyone knew the rumors. Mr. Hardwick was gay, rich, and attached to his mother. I've not been able to come to terms with my memories of the murder, to understand the way the end of his life initiated the life that was before me. A lady TV newscaster with hairsprayed winged bangs recounted the details of the shooting as she reported from the suburban scene of the crime. Perhaps he lived with his mother. The mother is essential to who he was, the mark of his sexual identity. I was years away from reading Freud, but I had already picked up that male homosexuals were especially attached to their mothers. I was proof of that myself. But I knew I did not want to live with my mother for the rest of my life, which seemed to be the custom in Mexico. At the time of the murder, I was in the 8th grade at Aloma Junior High School. My older brother, Ismael, however, was a sophomore at Downey, and so I had already heard about him, the 11th grade English teacher, the gay teacher. Students at Downey passed down stories about Mr. Hardwick to their younger siblings at La Loma. So there were many kids still at La Loma who knew about him. He inspired ambivalent interest because he couldn't or didn't care to hide that part of himself that made him what? Dangerous, vulnerable, a monster of rebellion. And so he had become a sort of legend, part of student lore. The following year, when I was a freshman at Downey, Mr. Hardwick's murder was still talked about. The rumors refused to die, kept alive by the persistent interest in Mr. Hardwick's privileged, tragic life. Among the teachers at Downey, however, there was absolute silence about Mr. Hardwick, as if, for them, he had never existed. The only exception to the inexplicable silence was Mr. Mendoza, the 9th grade English teacher. He alone partook of the mysteries born of Mr. Hardwick's gayness. Lecturing on Greek mythology, Mr. Mendoza, with a mischievous knowing grin on his face, his eyelashes fluttering, added, Apollo was muscular and athletic, the Greek ideal, the kind that Mr. Hardwick would have been fond of. And the boys at their desks shot glances at each other, smirking, relishing Mr. Mendoza's indulgence in scandal. In tight blue jeans and cowboy boots, Mr. Mendoza sashayed down Downey High's hallways with a questionable swaying of the hips. He spent weeks teaching us the myths of ancient Greece, the deeds of the gods on Olympus, the fantastic legends of the Greeks. It was one aspect of his curriculum Ismael had liked. At home, eating tacos at the dinner table, he described the adventures of Odysseus, the hero's encounter with the sirens, and the story of Medusa, the monstrous hag with snakes for hair. I couldn't wait to be Mr. Mendoza's student, to learn about the Greek gods from the book Ismael had passed down to me, Edith Hamilton's Mythology. In his happy lecturing mode, puffing on a yellow No. 2 pencil, a la Betty Davis, Mr. Mendoza recounted the drama of the Trojan War and the violence and crimes of the house of Atreus. I loved his telling of the marvelous stories that lifted me out of my usual dejection. Eric, a friend in the class, who usually sat next to me, mockingly pointed out the obvious. He's such a fag. And those within hearing chuckled. Eric had a talent for imitating the famous, Eddie Murphy, Johnny Carson, Jack Nicholson, and the not at all famous people we knew. And he imitated Mr. Mendoza's faggy mannerisms when we loitered in the school's hallway in front of our lockers. Although we felt we couldn't admit it, we liked Mr. Mendoza. He at least didn't bore us. He amused himself as much as he amused us. He didn't censor himself as other teachers did, and that set us at ease. It opened us up to him. He allowed us to be cool, which is what we all wanted to be. We could ask him questions we would have been reluctant to ask any other teacher. Do you smoke? Eric wanted to know. You act as if your pencil was a cigarette. Mr. Mendoza smiled, confident in his comeback. Well, it's healthier than smoking a cigarette, and it looks better. He was a regular Oscar Wilde at times. Mr. Mendoza took an interest in the arts, especially theater, and he was also a painter of sorts. Now and then, he was commissioned to paint murals and do set designs for theatrical productions at the high schools in town. When he was entrusted to paint a school pride mural in Thomas Downey's high school cafeteria, I was one of a handful of students he recruited to assist him. Every day, for more than a week, we stayed 2 hours after school to help Mr. Mendoza paint a mural that was to tower above the long tables, where only the students who signed up for or were assigned government-paid school lunches. These were the newly arrived Mexican and Salvadorian kids who were still learning English, the pale Russians who seemed to have landed in our midst from a distant planet, and the ambiguously foreign student, like the girl with the hairy armpits whose student said was Italian. She was straight off the boat. They didn't know any better. They weren't aware of the stigma attached to eating in the cafeteria. To eat cafeteria food on a tray at the cafeteria's long tables was to declare yourself a Downey High untouchable. Our task as Mr. Mendoza's art assistants was to bring colorfully to life his mural-sized drawing. Labeled according to the color it was to be painted, like a giant paint by numbers. Blue, in various shades, predominated since it was the official school color and emblematic of school pride. The drawing, which would be a mural when we were through with it, depicted a glorious tableau of Downey High School pride. In its center was a long-haired, buxom blonde maiden, a symbolic stand-in for the homecoming queen, riding atop a winged dragon. The Downey duck was at her side, and below dragon and maiden, a burgeoning stew of puffy clouds contributed an Olympian touch. Pictured next to the dragon-riding maiden were a couple of knights in full knight regalia, representatives of the school's football team, the Downey Knights. We were kept busy painting the white of the clouds, the light blue dress of the Downey maiden, and the dark blue armor of the Downey Knights. Rebel school groups like the Goths, the heavy metalers, the Cholos, not many, they went to schools on the west side, the Aggies, those who went in for farming and cowboy-cowgirl fashion, and the few Satanists, they wore black and hung upside-down crucifixes on their necks, didn't believe in school pride, and so were never seen during lunch hour pep rallies. Although cumulatively all the fringe groups added up to a majority, they were marginal in the school's cultural superstructure, and they felt it. Since I didn't fit in with any group, I felt it too. My pubescent years were to be saturated in Downey High's various blues. The marine blue of football players in cheerleaders' uniforms, the light baby blue of the school's hallways, the dark blue of hall lockers, a composite of blues that are the monochrome palette of alienation. Thank you.
What is that? Okay. Bien. Okay. So we would love to now invite all of our authors up for a conversation and to take any questions if folks want to ask any questions. Or alternatively, we could also just kind of head over to the wine and cheese and like have a chat there. I don't know. What do you think, Romeo? Shrug. What are you all feeling? Do you want to come up here, or should we all kind of congregate around the? Do you have a preference? Yeah. I feel like if it was a larger group, then we could, do the thing that we had planned. But yeah, we'd love to hang out with you all, and feel free to ask us questions, and feel free to purchase a book if you don't have one yet. And if you're in San Francisco a few weeks from now, you're also welcome to join us at Medicine for Nightmares, where we'll have our last book tour event for this book. So thank you all for coming, and please join us out for some nice conversation and some snacks. Thank you.